This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Pittsburgh to Scranton, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by the President of Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, Mr. Ed Arnold, who's the President of the center. At this point, I'm not going to shake your hand, Ed. Okay. I'm just going to elbow bump you. And I want to start off our discussion today before we launch into another Arnold report with a little bit of a tribute. I want to remember Roger Scruton passed away the other month. Roger Scruton was perhaps one of the most intelligent men on this earth who got very little publicity. He was the United Kingdom's version of William F. Buckley, and he was a one-man public policy shop for Margaret Thatcher. When you think of Roger Scruton, you think of all his writing on wine, hunting, fox hunting, music, architecture, language, and most of all, public policy and politics. It was an unfortunate loss, but we have lots of video to remember him of, and his books will continue to be used for years to come. Well, we have a lot to talk about today in this Arnold report, and I'm so thankful that you could come and join us today, Ed.
Very good.
We have a good number of questions that have been sent in since last time. There's been quite a few things that have been happening in the public square. So let's start right off this first segment. The first segment is, Mr. Arnold, where are interest rates headed for the rest of this year? What are the reasons behind our interest rate shifts?
Obviously, they're very volatile. That is an understatement. We know that they were just dropped a half a point, and now there is supposedly a very high probability that they will drop another half to 3/4 of a point when they meet next week. So that
and the Federal Reserve
the
meets.
Federal Reserve, yes, and that obviously control interest rates.
Right.
The 10-year Treasury, which of course sets mortgage rates, dropped to a super all-time low yesterday. Now it has bounced back a fair amount today, but it's still, considering the 2% was the lowest it had been, and now it's at 0.7 with the bounce back. It was as low as 0.3. So basic interest rates are very volatile, going down, and it sounds like they will go down another half a point, and I would assume at that point they will stabilize.
Well, there are some places in Europe, some countries, that actually have negative interest rates. Could you tell us what a negative interest rate is, and do you think America will ever see a negative interest rate, Ed?
Well, I guess to say never is, if you'd have said a couple of years ago that Europe would have negative interest rates, I'd have said never, because they don't make any sense. I mean, theoretically, it rewards you for borrowing because you borrow at let's say at 100, and you only pay back at 95, which doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really stimulate. Let's put it, it's turned, in my opinion, economics upside down.
Okay.
So basically, right now, our rate at this moment is 1 to 1 1/4, where Europe's is 0, basically. So if we lower it another half, we will be half to 3/4, or maybe even a quarter to a half. So we'll still be above Europe, but we'll be at by far the lowest we've ever been.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How can American industries return to our shores, since we have seen how over-reliance on China can backfire on many corporations?
I would hope that our corporations are going to wake up and realize you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. That it makes no sense that when something happens, especially some of these are small components to your, like in the sense of, I understand our automobile industry. There's certain widgets that they're being made in China 100%. So therefore, Hyundai, they've shut their plants down because of this disruption in China. That they're so dependent And of course, just-in-time inventory, that something happens and you have no reserves.
Now, tell us what just-in-time inventory is.
Well, it means
many people will know, but many will not.
Well, basically, it means you don't have everything in the warehouse. You order it, it comes, and it's flowing through, whether by ship or by truck or whatever. And there is no inventory. There literally is. This is what's going to go on the assembly line tomorrow is being shipped today, and it's going to arrive there just in time.
So nothing is going to sit around for long periods of time. The money is always working for the company.
The thing is, it's sort of funny today because the cost of money is so low that the idea of having that risk that if any little glitch happens, in this case, China, because they control, is causing, we could have a major shortage of drugs in this country because evidently a lot of our drugs, 95%, some people are saying, are manufactured, antibiotics are manufactured in China. And it's, at least if you'd have done it two places, even not necessarily even the United States, but to say you could save a few pennies by having everything at one spot, the risk, again, whether our government should consider that drugs are in fact a security issue and therefore
national security factor,
which I noticed Rubio was talking last night on TV about it.
Senator Rubio from Florida.
Yes, that so it's. I would like to think companies on their own would wake up and move things, and again, these are automated processes. A lot of them.
Well, your maxim, you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. That's the basic rule of all investment, that you should spread your investments across a wide assortment of industries. So that just seems to make so much sense.
So I would hope that American industry will adjust now because of this crisis.
Okay.
So that's one good thing that'll come out of it.
All right. Well, speaking of China, another viewer is concerned about something that has been in the news for over a decade, and that is what can we do now, and what should have we been doing to stop China's widespread industrial espionage in America? Perhaps he's thinking even during the term of Stephen Harper as Prime Minister of Canada, he banned all Chinese, essentially threw all the Chinese out of Canada, except the essential ones in the Chinese embassy in Ottawa, because of industrial espionage. What should we be doing, Ed? Are we doing enough?
You know, you say he banned it. I don't think he banned it from their universities. And
I don't know about the universities, but all non-essential, if you just couldn't, no Chinese person could travel there for tourism, for example, or without some kind of a reason.
I have not seen the article you're talking about, but I really doubt it was quite that restrictive because in the case of Vancouver, 1/3 of the Vancouver is Chinese, so therefore they are a tremendous amount.
They are citizens.
So to say that their relatives couldn't come visit and this couldn't happen and that couldn't happen,
it was very draconian. What should we be doing?
Well, unfortunately, just by the fact that we do a tremendous amount of our research at our universities are dependent upon Chinese students or Oriental students, but China specifically. It's a very difficult problem because we are in a free society, and in a free society, you allow people to come and go. So we're going to start to say, we're going to all of a sudden say, no, these group of people can't come when they've done nothing wrong. They may be doing things wrong, but the point is there's no real proof. You're convicting them without a due process. So I don't see there is a real solution, very frankly.
No solution. A friend of mine teaches at St. Petersburg University in Russia, and he is a historian there, and he is quite observant of the fact that all the Russian classes are filled with Chinese students who aren't even enrolled. They come to the classes, they take as many notes as possible, they run back to the dorm rooms, and they send all the information back to China. And he laughs because he said, what are we good at anymore? We're good at ballet and military technology. My school doesn't teach many military technology, so I don't know what benefit they're getting from it, but it's an interesting phenomenon. Well, let's move on to number 4. Dear Ed, should I invest in the new technology that is building self-driving cars, or do you think that this is a foolish wild goose chase?
Definitely, there's no question we will have automated cars. I think it's going to be a lot longer than most people think, only because we want perfection.
We've talked about self-driving cars briefly and self-driving trucks before.
That the thing is that if there's one accident, everyone has a fit. Well, there's going to be accidents. Whether they're better than people will be, that I guess could possibly be. But we've got to have a drastic change in our laws to allow it. And the liability, who becomes liable in the case of an accident? Is it the car owner, and so on? Because there's just a lot of complications legally that I think will move quite slow. And the technology itself, it's not going to be perfect. There will be people, there will be accidents. So I'm not sure we're prepared to accept the fact that, yes, they're safer, but there's still accidents. So I think it's going to be. The other problem is, if you'd have invested in the automobile in 1900, you'd have said, gee, this is going to change the world, and it did. Mm-hmm. The trouble is 95% of the companies that were formed or hired failed. So in the case, we're like the same thing here. Yes, there's going to be automated cars, but by whom? So if you're smart enough to know that, yes, Mr. Company A is going to absolutely succeed where B, C, and D are going to fail, then you're smarter than I am. Mm-hmm. So I think basically the risk to reward ratio is only because of the time factor, the government factor, and the who's going to make it. It is a very difficult investment.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay. The next question is from someone who is interested in the finer things in life, I suppose. More and more of my friends are becoming wine enthusiasts and drinking wine. What do you recommend as the best way to invest in the wine industry?
Unfortunately, there is no public instruments. There is two companies that, one is Diageo, the other is Consolidated Brands, that have a wine division, but it's a small part of a very large company. And in fact, Consolidated Brands just sold their wine division, I believe, to Gallo, which is a private company, which happens to be the largest private wine company in the world. Wine is a private industry. There's a tremendous number of vineyards, but they're all private, except for when these companies, these large spirit companies, they have alcohol, they have beer, they have the whole thing. So therefore, there really is no simple way to invest in wineries.
Okay, that's I'm surprised to learn that. I didn't know that myself, Ed. Before the break here, let us try to squeeze in one other short question here. I hear many different views on Jim Cramer's investment advice on CNBC. Can I trust Jim Cramer's recommendations regarding finance and investment?
I have not done a detailed analysis of how accurate have his predictions been, but he does seem to give a good analysis, and that he's fairly sharp. So to say that he is not as good as a lot of other people, it appears that he may be. I have not followed him hard. I've occasionally watched him, but I'm going to say, he probably is okay.
Mm-hmm. I'd watched him some years ago when he was throwing chairs across the room.
And he's entertaining.
He certainly is entertaining.
He makes financial analysis fun. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we will be back in just a moment with segment 2. Hang on.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, and I'm being joined for this show by Mr. Ed Arnold, the president of Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, with one of our regular Arnold reports. We left off, Ed, at a question about Harley Davidson. Do you drive motorcycles?
No, I do not. Never driven them. I've driven them, but I don't care for them.
Oh, well, I did many, many years ago, but I didn't own a Harley.
Ironically, in my industry, trucking, a lot of trucking presidents had Harleys. They used to go to trips and so on. Very popular in the industry.
Well, Harley Davidson's CEO just resigned after only 5 years on the job. Is Harley in trouble? Is Harley still a good investment? And that's an interesting question for Pennsylvania, since a good portion of Harley is located in York.
Harley has got challenges, obviously. They did not have, recently, their financial reports were not good. The other thing which is going against them, because of our tit-for-tat negotiations on trade with Europe, the Boeing situation has created where Europe is going to put excess tariffs on certain items in America. One of them is motorcycles. So they're going to increase their tariffs from 6% to 56%, which obviously is going to really freeze Harley out of the European market. So besides their other headwinds they're challenged with, there is no tariffs from people bringing motorcycles into America. There will obviously be very difficult for them to export. So again, I'll tell you what I can say. I don't follow the stock directly. The company obviously has challenges.
Okay. Well, in this day and age, it seems that presidential politics envelop us and our society around the clock for nonstop. For as soon as one presidential election stops, another one begins. This gentleman wants to know, Mr. Arnold, who are the best presidential candidates for the future of our economy?
Well, that's a very interesting question that I can unequivocally say Trump is by far, he's done an excellent job, and the candidates that are running against him will destroy the country. Bernie obviously thinks Russia is wonderful. Last I heard, Russia has not done well for its people, and there is no successful socialist country in the world. So his solutions and this massive spending programs, and pretty much he's drugged the rest of the candidates with him. So Biden isn't quite as way over there, but his plans are also extremely bad for the economy.
Okay. The next question we had touched on before. Why are 90% of America's antibiotics made in China? What can the United States do to change the situation as quickly as possible and bring home our medical manufacturing?
Well, as we talked about that earlier in our other program, obviously this was, in my opinion, a penny-wise and pound-foolish decision by our drug companies to save a few dollars. They now are realizing, I would think, the errors of their ways. Whether we as a government should pass some sort of restrictions that they must have a certain amount of manufacturing in America is, let's say, it's a mixed emotion, because I hate to see government get so involved in businesses. At the same time, I hate to see that our businesses are so irresponsible to put everything in all their eggs in the Chinese basket. So overall, I think now with this crisis, a lot of it will come back. It would seem to me that you've now been alerted, and I think your shareholders are going to say, hold it, this is a risk that is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like maybe in Canada we find that the Canadian Football League has a rule that only a certain percentage of the, well, let's put it this way, percentage of the team must be Canadian personnel.
Oh, I've never seen that.
Yeah, they can't bring in all Americans and fill their roster with that. Well, the next question is, as our major cities in America experience major economic and political challenges, should we be selling our real estate holdings in America's major cities? So what's the picture on real estate in the big cities in America, Ed?
Well, first of all, there's obviously a lot. Each city is somewhat different, but overall, you can say that the governments of our cities continues to get worse. The economic position of most of our cities is not good. They have tremendous pension liabilities, and it's, generally speaking, obviously our biggest city has the dumbest mayor in the world. So therefore, it appears that our electoral process, the people we pick to be mayors of our cities, I've shown not to be very competent. And so my opinion would be, especially since they've had a good run, in the cases of places like New York and some other cities, I would think to get out of real estate in New York would be in the major cities would be a good idea.
A designation of the dumbest, perhaps mayor in America, that could be quite a competition, perhaps. I don't know.
Yes. Basically, they've all been Democrats, and they've all basically been incompetent. We saw what's happening in Baltimore, what's happening in Philadelphia. All these cities, the government is really crippling the economies.
Well, which areas of health care are the strongest, and which areas of health care are the weakest to invest in right now, Mr. Arnold?
Well, basically, there's a thing called CRISP, which is a super technology that allows for testing and figuring out on an individual basis what drugs will work on people. This is still relatively new, and I don't know if they've actually got any products yet on the market, but it's sort of a nanotechnology, you could say. So I would think that the companies that are involved in these areas, which you'd have to see which ones particularly are, and it would be your high-tech drug companies. There will be new effective drugs coming out, which should be very positive. I think it appears that this is a breakthrough technology. So it would be to look at the companies that are in the most aggressive in the new methods of research and therefore development of new drugs.
Okay. Ed, we want to thank you then very much for another Arnold report. And I think you were able to effectively answer these queries from our listeners and summarize where we are with the coronavirus as well. So we'll be back next week for another edition of Behind the Headlines. We hope you'll join us then. Thank you much.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.